Zeneca, Roy, I've been following you for almost 3 years now. You were, like I said, one of my first follows in this space. I've seen you go from posting research on crypto floor prices, making these daily Excel sheets to, putting out a lot of educational content, and obviously now running your own NFT projects, investing in a lot of Web3 tech and Web3 companies. So, in your words, who is Zeneca and what has that journey been like for you entering the Web3 space?
Yeah, it's been a hell of a journey, that's for sure. So Zeneca is a pseudonym, I guess is the best way of describing it. My Twitter account name that I created in March 2021 when I was like diving deeper and deeper into crypto and Web3, sort of like you need to be on Twitter to sort of keep a pulse on the space. And I didn't really have, I mean, I had an old Twitter account, but I was like, let me just create a new one for crypto. And so decided on the name Zeneca, because I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy, and Seneca is a Stoic philosopher, and I had a book of his on my desk at the time. So then that's where it sort of all began. And then over the course of the last 2.5 years, has just sort of grown into like my identity, I think, has sort of merged with the name Zeneca. And before crypto and Web3, I was a professional poker player, which I did for about 15 years. That was my whole background. Straight from high school, I went to poker, and then just fell into crypto, and sort of just early 2021, I fell in love with it and started diving deep down the rabbit hole of, DeFi was blowing my mind. I was like, this is amazing. Why is everyone in the world not talking about DeFi and how cool it is? And then NFTs, I thought initially was a scam, I think like most people, but then eventually I came around. I was like, this is amazing. Why is everyone in the world not talking about NFTs? And went through the whole phase of, trading and flipping and getting rugged and losing money to scams like everyone does. And then somewhere I settled on like creating content with my daily floor price updates and my newsletter, and that eventually led into ZenAcademy and the 333 Club, which I've been working on for the last 2 years now.
I laugh when you said the rug experience because I think one of my first NFT mints was Metabots, where I also,
Metabots.
we happened to connect back then. So
Oh
yeah,
man.
that was my introduction to the NFT space was through a rug pull. So definitely some good memories back in the day. But Zen, you talk about how coming into now this area with Zen Academy, the 333 Club, you really fostered this idea of education, and I think always, I mean, over the last few years, people have looked at you as this thought leader that's sharing insightful content on Web3, on NFTs, on crypto. So I'm curious, like, what led to this personal mission, in a sense, of fostering education in the Web3 space, and especially in a space that's, so dynamically changing almost every day? How do you manage, or how do you manage your approach, and how do you think kind of the best practices for leading educational content is?
Yeah. I guess it all started because I started a newsletter like in June 2021. I started a newsletter and started putting these Twitter threads out, and I think the space just really resonated with them because there wasn't much NFT specific content at the time. And so to be creating that content, it was like there was just like all this immediate positive feedback towards the stuff I was putting out there, and I loved it. I felt good to be creating something that was helping others. And I mean, coming from my background as a poker player, it's like I never really ever felt like I was contributing to the world. And then flipping NFTs and JPEGs and trading, it's very PvP as well. But then when you're creating content and people actually find some value out of it, it's just a totally different feeling. And so like I just decided, hey, this is what I want to be doing. I want to lean more into this. I want to figure out a way to spend more of my time creating, because I genuinely enjoy it as well. I find it fascinating and interesting. And to your second point about how the space is changing so much, it it's really easy to create content because there's infinite new content. Like you can always dig into like a new topic and do a bunch of research, and it's really really interesting. And so that's what really helps keep me going, because there's the subject matter is so fascinating. It's cutting edge. It's literally changing the world in so many ways, and over the next decade, I think is going to change the world in so many more ways. So yeah, I really just I'm very fortunate that I'm able to do this because I love it. I enjoy it, and hopefully others will continue to get value out of it.
Great answer. And just kind of, going off what you said about how it is essentially now easy to create content. You have so many of these tools available. You have a bunch of AI stuff you can use. You have different distribution methods. And I know over the past few months, years, you've experimented a lot. I'd say in that sense, I've seen you, use your Twitter as an outlet. You've launched your newsletters for educational content. You did that whole mailing list in the middle where people could sign up and get daily educational content delivered. So I'm curious what approach you think has worked best in being able to actually establish meaningful relationships with your audience. And also, I think, what has been most effective in terms of actually the impact that that educational content has been able to deliver.
I think it's been Twitter and email, by far the two that have, for me, had the greatest impact. And I think that I think that regardless of, I mean, there's so many options. There's YouTube, and then there's TikTok and Instagram, and different newsletters and pipelines and things like that. I think the best, like if you are trying to create content or engage with others, the best thing you can possibly do is like honestly pick one and just do that really, really, really well. Um, a mistake that I made, and I like things I've learned over the last 2 years, was I kind of spread out too wide and tried, hey, let's do multiple newsletters. Let's try YouTube as well as Twitter and LinkedIn and Instagram, and you just end up getting spread too thin. And instead of doing one or two things really well, you end up doing 10 things very averagely or poorly. And so for me, like I'm a writer. I like writing. I think that's where like my skills are. I'm not great at creating video content. I'm not excellent at hosting a podcast. I've tried it, and I've tried all these things, but for me, written content is sort of the holy grail, and that's why I think Twitter and a newsletter are those two main outlets for me that I think have really, to me, it's just like it's a little more personal as well. Like I think videos are also very great, but I think just for me, honestly, be able to write and just directly reach someone else who's reading the words in their own interpretation of it is, it's just kind of special.
Really valuable to just think about that distribution strategy and essentially not spreading yourself too thin. We have, I think, people like Thread Guy, for example, are killing it now with Twitter. They've really maximized their reach on one platform, maximized their brand, and I think if it works, it works. I think a lot of people do get caught up in this idea that they need to be doing TikTok and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and everything, which you, like you said, you end up spreading yourself too thin. And also kind of, with that content side is the community side of things where these are the people that are engaging the most with your content. These are the people that look up to you, resonate with your ideals. And I think over this kind of journey that you've had in Web3, I'd say you've done one of the best jobs of curating your community. I think your Discord, for example, is prime community. You have so many. I know you've like changed it over the course of these past few months. I haven't been on Discord in a year, so I couldn't tell what it looks like anymore. But I know you keep kind of tweaking it. So I'm curious, especially for a lot of the builders here that are maybe struggling to build out their community or struggling to get eyeballs on the type of stuff that they're putting out, what strategies and approaches have worked best for you in building out your community and retaining your community? And maybe what advice can you give to founders that are just starting out that component of their journey?
Yeah, I think when it comes to like Discord management or building the community, like there's a million different ways you can do that, and a lot of approaches, and like there's no right answer there. It's like what works for one might not work for another, and it's like what you're most comfortable with, and you just sort of like grow into that in and of your own. But I think like to take it back a step into what you were saying about like when you're starting out, I think to me there's this this philosophy of like doing things that don't scale. Like Paul G has this really wonderful article on his blog that says do things that don't scale, and he's talking about like looking at a lot of the most successful startups in the world, Airbnb being one of the examples, where they would literally go around to people's houses and take photos and like professional photos to make it more appealing, that so that when people go on the website, they're more likely to make a booking. And now, obviously, that's something you can do if you have a few hundred users. You can't do that with a million users or even 10,000 plus. And that same philosophy, I think, applies a lot to community building, or growing in any respect. And so taking the time to spend like half an hour with individuals that you might want to have part of your community, just going out of your way to engage with them on Twitter, shoot people DMs, have like a half an hour conversation back and forth. And obviously, this is not something that can work when you have thousands or tens of thousands of people. But if you're trying to build a community, it's like a community is built one by one. It's like you need to bring in individuals that will then, create this network effect, and they will then bring in others that want to join the community aligned with a similar vision. So it's really just about, honestly, just putting in a tremendous amount of time. I think there's no real shortcut to building a meaningful community. It just takes time and effort and legwork. And then hopefully the idea is that over time, people will join because of the community and not because you as a founder or the founding team are spending an hour with each individual, because that obviously is unsustainable.
It's a great answer, and especially the idea of doing things that can't really scale easily. I think that's one of the intentions that I'm trying to build advisory with as well, right? I have these one-on-one calls with founders in here, and we do a bunch of different types of kind of connections. So completely resonate with that, and I think it's a good segue into. I guess I want to dive a bit more into the 333 Club, because I think I remember when the mint for that was coming out, there was a lot of thought around it, at the price point. The power just went out. But yeah, hopefully I'm still
Yes, you're
audible.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Indian monsoons. But yeah, so I think that was one of the things that was particularly interesting to the community and to me as well, because you obviously, with all your personal things that you've going on, it's really hard for you to essentially just agree to every request that you get, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why you decided to start this more close-knit community of people that can then use you both as an advisory sounding board, but also have access to each other and have access to all these brainstorming outlets. So I'm curious, like, how that went as an experiment, especially at a time when something like that just didn't exist in this space. The idea of alpha groups is so common now, but I think when you started it, it was really pioneering that whole concept of this paid, close-knit small community that can support each other. So if you could just talk about the experiences, the learning, some of the insights from that, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The concept didn't really exist at the time. This was November 2021. And I mean, like, we've been very intentional about it. It's not an alpha group. It really is. It was designed as a place for founders who wanted sort of advice about launching a project or releasing into like any sort of NFT company or project. And it very much was an experiment because I had no idea what I was doing, and I was very upfront about it. I told people, "Hey, I'm going to try this out, and it's a way to get like access to me in my time, as well as a community of other builders in the space, and we can hopefully create this wonderful network and ecosystem of people that will help each other out." And over the course of the last 2 years, I think mission accomplished. We've had, I've had hundreds of hours of calls with community members, but then we've had like community calls, and we've had people just reaching out to one another and really like helping each other out, growing in this space. And I mean, now there are a lot more options, but especially back then, if you were a founder, it was really difficult to know where to go. Like, how do you find a developer that's not going to try and scam you? And, what about marketing agencies, and how do you market your project, and how do you build out a community, and all that kind of stuff is things we discussed and really helped each other with. So it's been really, really rewarding to have that community. I think one of the interesting parts was that I have offered like directly my time to the holders, and obviously that's unsustainable or non-scalable forever. But I mean, I'm just happy to continue to allow anyone who has a 323 token to like book in 30 minutes of my time. I leave my calendar open on Tuesdays every week, and so like today I had 3 calls with community members. Obviously, it's a bear market, and people are less likely to be working on things, and a lot of people have had multiple calls already and aren't necessarily looking for more help. But as long as it is sustainable and isn't taking too much time, it's like a thing that I'm really happy to do, because I feel I get a lot out of it, as well as hopefully helping others. And yeah, it's just been, experiment is the word. It's both that and ZenAcademy, and I think everyone like in this space is experimenting. Like there aren't really any especially in 2021, like roadmaps or previous success stories of like what works and what doesn't, and how do you make an NFT token like gated community or membership community actually viable and work. And it's been, if nothing else, has been very interesting. But yeah, it's been very enjoyable too. You're on mute.
Literally going to be the next question,
Oh, there we
because
go.
I think, can you hear me now?
Yep, yep.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Sorry. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I'm glad from that was, I think we launched ZenAcademy. We love their concept of, or there was a huge emphasis on, was, you know, we're going to launch merge, we're going to do reverse activation, crazy game, and none of that ever ended up happening. And you came up with the idea of just having no roadmap at all, being pretty flexible in terms of how you continue building, experimenting, bring. And so I'm curious, like, if you, that's given you an advantage over these kind of market swings, and how that essentially like worked out for you from a planning and execution perspective, not having a roadmap to go off of. How are you still able to kind of manage the direction that your brands took?
Yeah, I think it was 100% the right decision. And I mean, having no roadmap and setting expectations from day one as being very low, telling people it's an experiment. I don't know where this is going to go. Um, it, on the one hand, relieved a lot of stress and made it less uh, like we were failing the community by not delivering on certain things because we promised very little. But it also made it so that people were less likely to get wrecked, in the sense that we had far fewer people buying, speculating on a dream, or like, you know, there's so many projects launched saying, hey, we're going to build a game, we're building a metaverse, we're going to drop a token, we're going to do a DAO, all these things that people speculated were going to lead to an appreciation in floor price. It really did mean that, especially in the early days, people bought because they believed in the community and the idea of being part of something experimental and navigating it together. So like we haven't really had that. Like we never hit it like a 10 ETH floor or a 5 ETH floor or anything crazy. But it's sort of like region bound us into being a little more sensible, I think, when it comes to like price fluctuations of the token itself, and expectations of community members. And like we've basically never had FUD because, again, we haven't promised things that we weren't delivering on. We've just sort of been figuring out as we go along, and oh, hey, this is a cool idea, maybe let's try this out and do it. And so I think it's worked really, really well, and we've done a ton of things I'm incredibly proud of over the course of the last 2 years, from multiple educational courses, ranging from completely free to paid courses that were free to holders. You know, events like online events and IRL events all around the world, and really just like helping the community one way or another. And it's been a joy to sort of see the community continue to grow even throughout the bear market. And now we have our PFPs coming out in later this month, really. And so it's sort of been in reverse, where a lot of projects in 2021 launch as a PFP, and then they've been trying to build and grow community since then. We launched a basic ERC 1155 token, and now we're giving our existing community a PFP because we think that it's fun, it's a nice reward, it's a way to represent on social media if people want. And again, with no expectations, we're not promising, hey, this is a PFP and now we're going to be the next Disney or create IP or anything like that. It's really just, hey, we have a community, let's give everyone a PFP to be proud of, and hopefully that will just strengthen the existing community that we have. And where we go from here is still a little up in the air. I think like a lot of companies and communities and projects, it's now, you know, we've been spending the better part of the last year trying to find sustainable revenue streams because royalties have all but disappeared. And that's like the main focus now. It's like, all right, how do we sustain ourselves as a business without sort of relying on Ponzi-nomics, or, you know, going back and dropping another collection to our existing community or continuing to charge our existing holders. And it's you know, it's a difficult thing to crack, but it's we have some ideas, and it's again wonderful to have a community that is supportive throughout the entire experience.
think, not having a roadmap's definitely, in a sense, been pretty good for you, I'd say, because you've avoided a lot of the hype cycles and unnatural expectations, I think, that come with even some of the best NFT projects, so to speak, in the space have failed because they just couldn't match the expectations that they just set themselves from the roadmaps and the hype announcements. So I think you've definitely avoided that. I'm curious, the role that you think you as a founder play in that expectation setting, and even with people buying into your NFT projects or the stuff you're putting out. I'm sure your personal brand has a lot of that attraction value for people. That, okay, if Zeneca is doing this, I want to be a part of it. I think we're seeing that with Frank the Gods, for example, with anything he touches. Board Elon Musk now is driving a lot of stuff. Jack Butcher's obviously killing it. So this idea of like the founders oftentimes can seem bigger than the brands that they represent. I think in Web3 especially could be considered almost a problem that if the founder disappears one day, is this project going to survive without them, right? Because they're the hype man, they're the face of it, they're the one driving all the brand loyalty to it. So I'm curious if you think that's the case, one, and two, what kind of role do you think your personal brand has had in the success of everything that you've been associated with?
Yeah, I think that is the case. And actually, I remember the original mint site for the Genesis tokens in 2021. I was just saying, like, hey, a lot of I mean, if I get hit by a bus, then the value is probably going to crumble significantly because so much of it is correlated and pegged to like me creating content, my personal brand, and my existing in the space. That's like that was the connection with the community. And now we have a wonderful team that has delivered and created so much stuff. But I think that yeah, founder died during mint and then came back to life. But I still think that for better or worse, the ZenAcademy is inexorably connected to me. And if I did get hit by a bus or disappear, I think the value of being part of the community would, hopefully doesn't go to zero, and hopefully the community still exists and thrives and is decentralized enough to continue in and of itself. But I do think that a large amount of it is connected to me. It's like you said, it's similar to Frank with D-Gods or Gary V with V Friends, or you have a lot of projects where the founder is sort of integral to it. And I think that one of I think it's, you could think of it as like a downside or a drawback, but I think it's intentional and by design as well. If you think about the world that we live in now, it's like we're becoming more and more accustomed to like the creator economy and like the Mr. Beast world, as I like to call it, where now individual creators are able to be rewarded for their work and get paid. Like, Substack, now people are writing and getting paid for it, YouTube creators, Instagram creators, et cetera, et cetera. But then now they can also reward their communities. And like Mr. Beast is, again, the prime example. He gives everything back to the community or puts it into future videos. I think that there is this beautiful flywheel that can and will be created where a creator is creating content and getting external rewards for it in whatever capacity. It could be financial, it could be otherwise, and then finding ways to pass that on to their community of supporters and find these like win-win-win situations. And that's kind of the model and mentality that I think of with ZenAcademy, where it's like, yes, there's me and my personal brand and the things that I'm creating, and then there's ZenAcademy, the community, and obviously they're very linked together. And I think that they can like work in a symbiotic relationship where they sort of help each other lift each other up.
I think that's a great perspective on it, and I do think that your personal brand does reflect a lot of integrity on anything that you're building, especially if you're someone that has a good track record. We spoke about this with Board Elon Musk when he was on this call as well. Was he's completely anonymous, and how do you still manage to find opportunities? How do you manage to build trust with people? And this whole idea of your personal brand reflecting your values, your integrity, your track record, and that then ultimately gets you opportunities or gets you that level of success. And I think for a lot of the founders in our group, for some of them at least, that's been a struggle where they haven't been able to fully tap into their personal brands. And as a result, there's still this obstacle that they have with actually getting their companies or their brands off the ground because they just don't have that established personal brand and track record in Web3 yet. They might have that in the Web2 space in their previous lives, but this space, they're still trying to establish that. So I'm curious, from someone in your shoes who's built your personal brand at the scale that it is, and you've also sustained it, which I think is more important. You haven't fallen off in the past year or two. So what advice would you have to anyone trying to build more of a personal brand and then leveraging that for their work?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you bring this up. I'm actually working on a course right now, personal branding in Web3, so it's kind of quite topical. I think that, I mean, personal brand is a little bit of a loaded word or phrase, but I think that everyone has a personal brand, whether you try to create one or not. It's just your reputation. It's what people know of you of. It's the way you conduct yourself. It all adds up to your personal brand. And obviously there are things you can do to try and enhance the profile of it or make it a certain way. And I think that one of the difficulties is that a lot of people try and be someone that they're not. And I think that it's easy to fall into the trap of looking at others maybe on Twitter who have huge presences and be like, oh, I need to be more like that person. But the reality is, if you're trying to be like someone that you're not, you're going to put in 10 times the work and only achieve 1/10 of the outcome. Instead, I think it's about sitting down and thinking about what your strengths are. And maybe your personal brand is to be like a quiet behind the scenes operator who is just, connected with a few people, but you're well respected in your niche field. And that's totally fine. You can find tremendous success in that spot. But I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I need to have a personal brand like Frank from DGods or whomever, where, you want to have 100,000 followers on Twitter. You want to have this, that, and the other. And I think it's almost a trap where we live in this social media age and people think more followers equals better. But there's like 1,000 other paths where you can find a lot of success by just, heads down working or connecting and networking with a handful of the right people, which again, to me, all goes to growing a personal brand. It's just not necessarily a social media brand.
I think that's a good answer because I think Web3 especially places a lot of emphasis on your personal brand being your social media brand when that's not the case. And when I go to these NFT events is when I meet some incredible people. And, they're some of the smartest people I've met through the space, but then I'll open their Twitter and they have like 100 followers. And it really
Yes.
does show you that, yeah, some of the smartest minds, some of the people who've been contributing the most to Web3 from behind the scenes are actually some of the quietest people on social media, but people who need to know them very well. So I do think that's, definitely a great perspective. And I saw Fiona's response that this is something that, she might be interested in. And so definitely send the course along. And since I see Fiona here, so Fiona is an incredible artist. And I think this idea of personal branding and the idea of trying to connect with collectors and social media presence, especially hits a lot of the artists in the NFT space. There's this unspoken pressure on them that they have to continuously shill their work, DM collectors, reply to share your art threads and all of that stuff. And fun fact for the group, Zeneca is actually my first ever one-of-one NFT art collector. So quick say he's one of one in Zeneca's collection, which is awesome. Still very grateful for that. But I'm curious, from an artist perspective now with royalties drying up and everything that's been going on for the artist struggle, you as someone who's supported a ton of artists in this space, even with your 12 Days of Zenmas initiatives where you commission artists to create stuff for you. I'm curious what approach you think is best for artists in this space, as there has been a lot of negative sentiment, a lot of skepticism, a lot of artists have left this space. Is there any message that you have for artists to kind of continue pushing through and how they can continue to put their work out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult. It's difficult for everyone in this space. If you're a founder, if you're a trader, if you're whomever, a collector, if you're an artist, it's just really tough to make it in this space. I think For a while, there was this impression that, oh, get into NFTs, you make art, you make a lot of money. And maybe that was true for a brief window in 2021. But it certainly hasn't been the case for a very long time now. And, you know, I would draw the same parallels to, you just take the NFT and the Web3 out of it, and you think of as an artist, it's sort of always been difficult to make a living out of it, or to find collectors and to find people who will buy your work. And that's, you know, unfortunately not significantly different online. I think what's different is the market is now worldwide and global, and it opens it up to, you know, being able to find collectors from any corner of the globe that might connect and resonate with your work. To me, as a collector, I'm not an artist, but I'm someone that collects. To me, and I've been thinking about this more lately, I think what matters most is the story behind the art and the story behind the artist. And so, like, the visual aesthetics, obviously it's an important part of art, but when it comes to collecting art, and especially when people start spending more and more money on pieces, I think I mean, why do people buy art is a really good question. And I think one, I mean, there are a few reasons. One is that they like the look of it and they want to own it. Two is, you know, maybe there's some flex reasons and people just want to feel like an art collector and that kind of stuff. But I think a huge part of it is wanting to support the artist or wanting to support the arts. That's like, people want to just support them. And I think that you have to give people a reason to want to support. And so that's where, like, I think telling your story in a way that is meaningful and intentional. And like, if you spent, you know, if you've been creating art for 20 years and a piece that you made is something that, you know, you can show inspiration from 8 years ago and then 3 years, and then like that journey that takes people through, like, hey, this is something I've been working on for a long time, and this is why it's meaningful. This is what it means to me. I think all of these pieces play into like the appeal and allure of wanting to collect from that artist. I think even then, it's still not quote unquote enough. There's an element of needing to play the whole I don't know if it's like marketing game or social media game, or, you know, but there's a fine line where you need to be able to do it in a way that is genuine and authentic, and doesn't make you sort of hate yourself. And I think that's where perhaps a lot of artists, and not just artists, like creators and founders and like writers and like people, don't like going out there and shilling their own thing, or, you know, they don't like the whole social media world of where we try and, you know, boast and pump ourselves up and share our work. It's not, I think, natural to a lot of people. And so you just have to find the thing that works best for you. And I think that it's really a case of being sort of consistent and just showing up and like being around and existing in the space. And it might take years for, you know, someone to find the right collectors or for their work to sell, and it may never sell. There's no guarantees in any of this, but I think the opportunities are there. And it's just sort of about having sensible expectations and being realistic about, hey, maybe no one will buy my work for 4 years, or I say the same. I had a call with someone earlier today that had like created an entire 10K PFP project, and they've had it ready to go for 6 months, and they're sort of like waiting for the market to turn around. And I was like, well, maybe it will never turn around. And that's just the reality of the world now. And it's just about being realistic about it, and just having sensible expectations, and hopefully just doing things that you love, creating work that you love, and just putting it out there. And, you know, there's a leap of faith that comes into creating and as well as collecting art, and just hopefully your work gets in front of the right people at some point in time. Yeah.
It's a great answer. Honestly, really resonated with kind of all those points. My super rare genesis has been like sitting on super rare for 6 months on auction, no bids, nothing. And I think that's just like part of that experience. But I do really kind of like what you said about artists telling their story, because I think that's one of the biggest, as someone who's also collected a lot of NFT art, that's one of the advice that I always give out to artists is be authentic. I've seen a lot of artists try to always, you know, go after that latest kind of hype or trend because they think, okay, if this artist style is selling, maybe I should also just start making glitch art. And, you know, this is a traditional oil painter now suddenly making glitch art every day. because that's what they think the market is wanting to buy. But in that process, they often lose what's making them unique and what's making them authentic in their own story. So yeah, I think that was a great answer. We'll definitely get Mackie to clip that so we can share it around for more artists to see and hear. And I think the other thing that I wanted to touch base on, especially because you said that it is a difficult market now for everyone, not just artists, but founders, switching gears and coming to this topic of fundraising. I think we've seen it across the space lately, not just Web3, but just fundraising in general. A lot of ex unicorns are struggling to raise their next round. There have been a lot of down rounds. So you, in the capacity of an angel investor, you've invested in some of the biggest and most known and often most hated Web3 companies as well. But I'm curious, like as an angel investor, what tips, advice, insights do you have from this fundraising world that you can give to founders in the community? Because a lot of them are actually actively looking to raise or actively raising. So I think your insight into this whole experience would be really helpful there.
Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with the macro market, and it's just a factor. There's just far less liquidity going around now than there was late 2021 or even a lot of 2022, and so it's just tougher to raise, and the barrier is higher. That's just a reality. Like I myself haven't invested in anything for probably 6 months now. Most of my investments were earlier. That said, there are things that I think it's important for a founder to think about and be able to explain to whether it's a VC or an angel investor that is looking to they're trying to raise investment from. And it's basically the number one thing everyone is looking for is a return on their money. Like if I invest money into this company, how is the company going to make money in such a way, and then enough money in such a way in the future that it's going to work out and make a return on the investment. And it's kind of I've been pitched so many decks and been in so many calls, and it's a little jarring how frequently a founder can't answer the questions pretty like how they don't have a direct line to revenue, where they have maybe a cool idea and they're like, hey, I want to build this thing, and then you ask them, well, how are you going to make money? And they sort of stumble and stammer and don't have a good answer ready to go. And that's like the number one question you need an answer ready to go for. That's the only thing that really matters is how are you going to, what's your product market fit? Who's your market? How are you going to generate sustainable money? Beyond looking at 5-year, 10-year charts and projections of the macro market. And you can have a 30 slide pitch deck, but if you can't answer the basic questions of how you're going to make money and also why your company, why you're the right person to do it. I think that's the other important part. You can have a great idea, but you might be the wrong person for executing on it. And I mean, on the topic of pitch decks, I think less is more, and do have a shorter deck. Don't feel like you have to fill 30, 40, 50 slides. Often 5 or 10 slides can get the job done. And I think the job of a pitch deck is not to secure funding. The job of a pitch deck is to secure a call with the person to then explain. And that's when they'll ask you the hard questions. And that's when you want to have the right answers to be able to tell them how that's when you really sell yourself and sell your company and sell your idea. And that's when you need to have everything ready to go on in terms of how you're going to generate revenue. But I mean, that's the number one thing. It's how is this thing going to make money? And it's also different if you're trying to raise from angels and friends and family and that sort of approach. It's kind of different to if you're raising from VCs. VCs generally want 100x, 1000x return on their money, or they're not particularly interested. Whereas angels or friends, family, they might be willing to take a risk that might pay off and all right, I see it's quite likely you might 5x your money, but this is not going to turn into $1 billion company. I think you'll need to tailor your approach differently depending on who you're trying to raise from. And both can work. And there's pros and cons to angels and family and friend rounds versus VCs. Yeah, I mean, there just are pros and cons. VCs are great for connections and deeper pockets and things like that. And then, but often maybe there's a little more stress that comes with that, or that there's higher requirements. And then angels and family and friends might be a little more low key and chill about where you are. But the other thing I'll say on this is, I think sometimes people feel like they need to raise money when they don't. And I'm a big fan of bootstrapping and trying to get it done before raising funds, because I think that when you raise, not only do you give up equity and give up control and have all that kind of additional overhead mentally and stuff like that, it can almost make people complacent. If you raise $2 million and now have 3 years of runway and can hire 10 people, well, you'll go out and you'll hire 10 people. But very often that happens before thinking, should I hire 10 people? Do we need these people? Do we have work for them to do? And then all of a sudden, 2 years down the track, you realize, oh, we spent all this money and we had all these people, but what do we actually get done? Whereas if you're like bootstrapping it and trying to make it work with 3 months of runway, and you're like trying to think about where's the money going to come from, that's when you really start watching every penny and start cutting costs and make the business lean and more likely to succeed. So I think that even before entering the fundraising discussions, it's like thinking about, do you really need that? And in some cases you do. Like, you've got a great idea and it's, you know, like you're already starting to generate a bit of money and like there's product market fit. And if you just had $500,000 or $1 million, you could hire 3 people and just 10x your customers and immediately make more money. Like that's the dream case for fundraising. But I think most people just think, hey, I've got a cool idea, I'm going to raise a bunch of money and then try and execute it and then find product market fit and see if and in most instances, I feel like that doesn't actually work.
That's a perfect answer. And also, we're literally twins because I posted yesterday on Advisory's like Twitter. We just posted a clip where I said the exact same thing about bootstrapping and how a lot of NFT projects raised too much and as a result became complacent. And spent it all or didn't know how to spend it correctly. So yeah, we're definitely twins.
I put myself in that category
yeah.
as well, by the way. Like, we did our NFT launch in 2021 and raised, non-insignificant amount of money. And then over the course of the last 2 years, we achieved a lot. And I don't want to say that, it was wasteful spending, but definitely got complacent and probably didn't, like, if it was all bootstrapped, would have been a little more intentional and methodical. But like, I mean, I'm a first-time founder and we all learn as we go along. And it's like, I mean, looking back, I'd be like, I do things differently, but it is very easy to get complacent if you, and I think it's like, it's less relevant now in a bear market because everyone is kind of really, everything's under a microscope. But I think it's important to keep in mind when the market turns around, if when we have another bull run and money is freely flowing and maybe you happen to secure funding often off just like a basic idea, you want to be really intentional about how you spend that money and saving it and making sure that it lasts as long as it can and not hiring just for the sake of it and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's one big issue we saw was teams overspent on hiring and, they became too bloated. And we saw a lot of downsizing happen over these past few months as they had to come to terms that no one's funding more of these unrealistic valuations. So completely resonate there. Also, the context for everyone on the call with the twin thing is I went to an NFT event where I put on a name tag that said I'm Zeneca. And the whole night, people were taking photos of me and posting it online.
Oh, it's so funny.
Thinking I was Zeneca. I got invited to conferences to speak at, so it was quite an adventure. But cool. So the last question I have from the fundraising side for you, Roy, is how do people go about finding angel investors? I think tapping into VCs has now become relatively easy. But I think finding meaningful angel investors that will resonate with your work and your mission and stuff is still a bit of a challenge for first-time founders. So do you have any advice for that?
I mean, I can only really speak from my experience. And when someone asked me if I wanted to angel invest for the very first time, I didn't even know what it meant. Like, I was that foreign to the whole world. I was just like, well, I create content and now I'm in the NFT space and now you're asking me to be an angel. Like, what does that even mean? And so I had to go off and Google and stuff, but it was just cold outreach. Like, someone just sends you a DM. And I think that's one of the best ways is just DM people that you might think might want to invest in your thing. And you're going to get 98% silence or no's or ignored. But it's a numbers game, right? And you just want to get your foot in the door. And then it's a matter of trying to like leverage as many connections as you possibly can. So if you get one angel investor, ask them, can you connect me with one other person? or anyone you think of, and then just try and like grow your network out that way. And again, like chances are they probably won't connect you with someone, but maybe the hit rate is instead of 2%, it's 10% now or 20%. And it's really just about, it really is just a numbers game. You might have an idea in mind of who you want, and then you can kind of target your approach a little more methodically to try and reach that particular person. Or if you're just looking for like more general angel investors from people who are like prominent figures in the space, or maybe have invested in other companies, then it's really just about trying to find any way possible to reach them. And the other thing I would say is like make your cold outreach message as short and to the point as possible. Like nobody likes to receive a 3-paragraph thing telling you. Just say, hey, I know I'm working on this company. I'm looking for investment. I would love to have you involved. Can I send you a pitch deck or something like that? Maybe with one little brief bit about what the company does or like why you think it's so special. And it's just way more likely to get read and responded to than even like even than 1 paragraph. Just keep it to 1 or 2 sentences, I think. Oh, actually, one other thought.
Yeah.
IRL events is a really, really good way of meeting people. Just the connections and networking you make in person are just like unparalleled. And again, you don't want to be the annoying person that goes up to people and corners them and tries and sells them and pitches them for 10 minutes, but just, meet people and say hello. What do you like? Ask them what they're working on, and then they'll ask you, and you tell them. And then if they're showing interest, be like, "Hey, by the way, we're raising funding. If you're interested or know someone, give them a card." And then whatever it is, just it's a whole skill in and of itself. But I think there's so many great crypto events around the world that it's not always affordable for people. But if there's one locally, or if you can travel, go to a few of those, and it's a really, really great way of meeting potential investors.
Yeah, I think that's definitely good advice, and I'm still trying to get a +1 for Ape Fest, trying to see if I can make it. So fingers crossed for that. But so the last question that I have for you, and in the meanwhile, if anyone has questions for Roy, feel free to raise your hand. I'll call on you, but we can get those hands up now. But Roy, last question I ask this for every guest that comes on. It's just what Web3 trends, innovations, things you're observing are you most excited about as we head into the future? Things besides LK99 superconductors and, more relevant to our space.
I was so excited for that. I think I read today that it was like disproved, or unlikely to be real, which is a big shame. In terms of trends that I'm excited by, I think it's just the general usability improving and increasing, and it's so much better now than it was 2 years ago. And I think like imagine where we're going to be in a couple of years time. I think like PayPal has a stablecoin coming out, and there's just fiat on ramps left, right, and center, and like wallets are getting easier and easier to use, and you don't necessarily need seed phrases anymore. And just the ability with which people will be able to transact via blockchains potentially without even knowing that they're transacting on a blockchain. And just having it be like this underlying layer of the internet or this settlement layer or whatever. That to me is like the most exciting part. Sort of goes hand in hand with like all the L2s taking off, and Optimism, Arbitrum, Coinbase, all these new chains that are incredibly gas efficient and secure, and just will make the future that we all hope for a reality. And it's all coming together. Like it's crazy that we're in. It's just that the juxtaposition of like where we are in the market cycle in terms of prices and like this depths of this terrible bear, but the technology has literally never been better. It's like way better than it was in 2021, and like the ability for someone to onboard and use this like whatever, and the security is better than it was then, and the apps are better, and the infrastructure is better, and everything is better, and then the environmental impacts are better. It's just crazy that the market is that inefficient, that back then it was so high and now it's so low. And it makes me optimistic of the future, because it's just like bull or bear market price wise, the tech keeps improving, and it's just going to keep getting better as time goes on. So in 10 years time, 5 years time, it's going to be a glorious thing to behold.
Definitely, share your optimism and bullishness there. I do think that like the tech advancements and like you said, usability is improved so much since like back in the day. So definitely really, really excited about everything coming. Houston, you have your hand raised. Do you have a question for Roy?
Yeah. Hey, Roy, I really enjoy your content and appreciate your time here today. But on the topic of fundraising, one thing that we've been trying to focus on is incubator programs that are accepting applicants. Aside from all the generic questions they ask each project or founder, what are some ways that a project or a founder could stand out aside from those, generic questions that everybody submits?
Yeah, it's a good question. Having not been through an incubator myself or like been on either side, it's hard for me to say. But like if I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of like if I was reading applications, I would want something. I mean, it really just comes down to the idea being good enough to separate it, and it probably does come back down to the revenue thing again. Like if someone saw an idea in an incubator program and there was a clear line to revenue of like, this is, we've done some market research. We know how to create it. This is how we're going to monetize. It makes sense. Like that to me is the key thing, regardless of if you're going for an incubator program, you're trying to get a grant from a blockchain or country or university or whatever. All of it, or you're trying to get VC funding. I think the main driver is product market fit and like how is the thing you're creating going to actually help people? How is it something that's going to be in demand? And how will you generate revenue? And I think that just constantly coming back to that revenue point is to me that and like the actual product market fit of like, all right, do people actually want this thing? Just highlighting that over and over, I think is probably the most important thing. Even more important than like the history of the founder or like, obviously it's important, like who you are and what your experience is and why you might be the right person to do it. But, successful founders are made a million different ways. It's really just having a good idea and a good plan to execute on it that really matters the most, I think.
Awesome. Thank you.
Harshad, I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Yes. So, hey, Zeneca, love your setup actually. So one question that I have is about like building in public. I actually understand that what you're talking about was like go outside, like meet people, connect with them, network with them. But I understand that, but I don't know why. But it kind of feels like artificial to me when it feels like I'm forcing that kind of connection. But are there any ways to increase like the luck surface area of finding the right kind of people, attracting the right kind of people? Like one way I see, which I actually learned from you, is of course being on camera, showing your presence on like different platforms. That's something that I'm trying to inculcate. But basically, like increasing the luck surface area. How do you do that as a founder? So that's one question that I had.
Yeah, I think it's really just about putting yourself out there as much as possible. And I know what you mean about it being a little inorganic or inauthentic, but it doesn't have to be. Like you can genuinely want to say hello to people, and like maybe yes, you have an ulterior motive and you're hoping that it might lead to funding or opportunities, but like make friends. Like it's so simple, but like just try and make friends and like say hello to people and be like, see how you can help them, and just like show an interest in what they're doing, and maybe they'll show an interest in what you're doing, and just like continually doing that across whether it's social media or IRL events or Discord calls or places like this or wherever it is, just showing up and just getting it's sort of the difference between being an observer and like a lurker and someone that doom scrolls Twitter and just like sits in the back of conferences and just like comes in and then the opposite of being someone that like responds to posts and goes and like introduces themselves to people at conferences, and just like it does take that extra step of putting yourself out there. And I think it can be difficult for people who I mean, for people that are shy or who are introverted. Like I'm an introvert, and like it took me months before I even joined a Twitter space, and then like 6 months in the space before I felt comfortable talking on a Twitter space, because I have anxiety and I'm like nervous. But after a while, if you push yourself and get through that comfort zone, it starts to get easier and easier. And I think it's really just a matter of putting yourself out there. And like one of the nice things about this being online is that, if you do have that, those reservations of going in person and meeting people, you can do it anonymously behind a screen from the comfort of your home and just respond to tweets. Like that's probably the lowest hanging fruit of like, just like getting people knowing who you are, and just like, you can just like build it up from there. But it's, it's a numbers game, and it's the more of that you do, the more of that luck surface area that gets increased. And, you can expand it to, LinkedIn and other social platforms, and just as many places as you can manage yourself. But I think that if you really work hard, like one platform is probably enough. You can spend all your time on Twitter and still make meaningful connections there, or LinkedIn.
And Harshit, Roy, do you have a hard stop, or can you go a minute or two?
No, I can go a bit longer.
Okay, cool. Vova, do you have a question?
Yeah, first, thank you so much, Satvik, for organizing all this. Thank you, Roy. Very meaningful conversation, and I've taken a bunch of notes. We'll be implementing those. Really, thanks. So my question is just a very short one. What is the best, I must say, like a framework to get in contact maybe with someone like you if the startup is not looking for money? If the startup is looking just for like some sort of collaboration advisory work, if the startup has already raised investments and has some traction and has like a bunch of partnerships like tier 1, tier 2 companies, like if all that is in place, how to get the best probability of contacting someone like you?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on each individual. I think for me personally, there's like the cold messages on Twitter and stuff that has a low percentage chance of me seeing. Usually, I mean, I think I have my own website, and I used to have a contact page there. It's disappeared, but I have a new website launching soon, which will have a contact page. And so I think that, I think a lot of people in a similar position to me will have, whether it's like a contact form for like advisory roles or speaking engagements, or just like look for that. Otherwise, just like try and find different social media platforms. Like I'll have people message me on LinkedIn and have people message me on Twitter and like Discord. And sure, I might miss a lot of it and not see it. But again, it's that numbers game. And Discord is another great option. Like, the single best way to reach me is going to the ZenAcademy Discord and create a support ticket, because then someone on my team will see it. And if it's relevant, I will always see it. Whereas, the cold messages or DMs or whatever, it's like, there's a pretty high chance I miss it these days. But yeah, I mean, and just like be shameless and be relentless. Like, I think that it is a numbers game. Like we have for ZenAcademy, we have this payroll company. We use Rise. And the reason we're using them is because someone from their team DM'd me on LinkedIn 4 times, like 4 different times over the course of, a few months. And I guess I saw it at one point and ignored it. But then a previous payroll provider, we had issues with them. They weren't good. And we were like, hey, we need a new payroll provider. And in the back of my head, it was like, hang on, I think someone on LinkedIn was reaching out. Let me go check them out. And then I found the DM, and it worked out great. So I think it's like, just be shameless, because not like either one or two things happens. Either most likely, you don't get through and the person forgets and ignores and will never remember, or they see it and they're like, hey, this is actually something that makes sense and I'd love to chat with them. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah, being shameless is how I got Roy on the call today. So, it definitely works. Just stick with it. Aditya, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Roy. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm also a content creator, and like what I'm been struggling with is like quality content gets a really less traction than a FUD or a spam or rug pulls. So how do you deal with that? Like, do you keep on showing up every day, or how do you stand out?
Yeah, it's one of the tricky things about being a content creator. I think really good quality content will still always rise above and stand out. And it's it is unfortunate that a lot of like the attention, like just generating and grabbing type of content does also take off, engagement farming kind of stuff. But I'm a really firm believer in, if you create really excellent content, it will find an audience and people will resonate with it. And I think that it takes time. Sometimes it takes like months of consistently creating content and putting it out there for it to sort of take off. But I really do believe that it will. I think if you've been creating content for 6 months, 9 months, a year, and haven't really seen any sort of traction, even like 3 to 6 months of like, then I think that's when you really need to look at the content itself and think maybe it actually isn't as high quality or as great, or maybe there's, you know, dozens of people doing similar content and you need to put a different twist on it and make it stand out in some other way. But if you look at, I mean, again, look at the biggest content creators in the world. They all create excellent content. It's not people doing, you know, engagement farming tactics. Like they'll only get you so far. If you really want to be a great content creator, it's just like focus on making the best content and focus on one platform and one pipeline at a time. So whether it's Twitter threads or whether it's a newsletter or whether it's YouTube, just get really, really good at that one thing. And yeah, like that's it. I know it seems like it's not like a meritocracy, but I really do think that over a long, like a year or two time span or longer, the really good content does rise to the top. So I would just say, just keep working on your content. And if it's not taking off, then you probably need to like continue to work on it and try new things.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, Roy, do you have time for 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We'll do the last 2 questions. So, corporate comics, you're up next. Do you have a question for Roy?
Hey everyone, thank you so much. Cheers, Satvik. So yeah, I guess my question is that from what I can tell, you read a lot and you obviously write a lot. What would you say is a good starting point, both in terms of resources and in framework, to get better at writing?
That's a good question, because I have no formal training in writing. I never really had resources. For me, it was just reading a ton and writing a lot. And I think it's in terms of formal resources, yeah, I'm sort of at a loss for recommending things because I don't know myself. But for what worked was just starting like that. And this goes for any sort of content, whether you're creating videos or Twitter threads or a newsletter, but like just start, put it out there and do it consistently. And you will get better. Like I go back and look at like my earlier Substack posts and like my earlier tweets, and they were terrible compared to like what I might put out now, because I just didn't know any better. But you learn each time and you go back and you think about what you wrote. And it's just that the practice of I think writing is to me one that is nice, because you can get better at writing both by writing and by reading. And so read lots of books, read from different authors, read other newsletters, read Twitter threads from people you respect, and have like a mind to like think about, all right, what works, or like what kind of flow or style in their writing made sense, and just try and incorporate that and take inspiration from everywhere. I'm sure there are fantastic like copywriting courses and writing courses and things out there. I don't know of any off the top of my head. Other than in the back of my mind somewhere, I'm remembering that Stephen King wrote a great book on writing that people recommend a lot, even though I haven't read it myself.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
I also put out a really cool thread on, I think, your favorite books or something of that sort the other day. So, definitely check out Zeneca's Twitter and that thread. And I also recommended a book on it, which has been one of my favorites since high school. So, yeah, I thought it was a really good thread. Tuesdays with Maury. I know you're going to be reading it next, so excited to see what you think of it.
Yeah. I'm excited to read it.
Exciting. And I think the last question is Alex. Alex, do you have a question for Roy?
Yeah, great. Thank you. You probably know me as Captain Southpaw. I don't think we've ever exchanged first names before. But so I'll fumble through this a little bit. It's more of an existential or maybe theoretical question. But I see a lot of companies focusing kind of on the US base or only international. And so my question is maybe more if you have any commentary on how do you honor the sort of world and global nature of what we're trying to do in Web3, and then also honor those individual nation states or localities, I guess, because I know that you're also New Zealand, I think, right? So I'm sure you've dealt with this.
Yeah, with great difficulty. I mean, I'm Australia. I'm like born and raised in Australia. My family is originally from India. I was living in Germany for like 3 years, and now I'm in Dubai. It's like I'm myself kind of very everywhere. And then with like ZenAcademy or like my newsletter subscribers, it's like US is the #1 audience by far. And then you have like UK, Germany, India, Japan. It's just like, it is a very global thing, but it is also very heavily skewed towards the United States. That's just kind of the world that we live in, for better or worse. I think, yeah, there's no great answer here. I think it's very difficult to sort of cater to the United States and also cater to South Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. It's just, there'll always be some overlap, but there'll generally also always be someone exclusively focusing on, say, the Japan or South Korea that's going to do a way better job. So I think that play to your strengths. If like English is your primary language and your culture is more like what you know is a little more towards like US, UK, that kind of, then that's probably where you're going to end up, you know, creating and having most of your, whether it's users or clients or fans or followers or whatever from those areas. And then I think at a certain point in the future, you can potentially look at expanding into the other markets. But I just think the reality is that it's very difficult to truly be global, even though it is a global world. Partially because of language barriers. Those are kind of going away as like translation tools are getting better and people around the world are getting more bilingual or multilingual. But for me, it's just like accepting that that's just the way that it is. And yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, like, to answer that, Mr. Beast has a really cool podcast. I'm forgetting who he spoke about this with, but he basically said how he just hired professional translators to dub every single one of his videos for different regional content. And like, they actually end up doing sometimes better than his main channel does. Like his Spanish channel in Mexico and like all of that. So that might be another playbook, is just hiring professionals to grind your content a little bit.
I saw
awesome.
that podcast.
So,
yeah, it's genius what he's doing, because he would get like the best voice, like the people who like did the dubbing for like Spider-Man in Brazil or whatever. He would get them to dub his content, and he like white labeled the service and would do it for all the other like big influencers. And I think he's making a tremendous amount of money off of it. But yeah, like I mean that's certainly an approach where at a certain point you grow and then you start translating your content into other languages. We tried that at ZenAcademy. We have this email course, 30 Days of NFTs, that we translated into Spanish, Portuguese, German. But the problem is that like it was a lot of work to do, and then because we're not natively known in those regions, maybe we had like 100 people or 30 people sign up versus the 10 or 15,000 that signed up for English. It didn't end up being worth pursuing over the long term. So until you reach a certain size, I think it's probably just best to focus on the more natural organic markets for you.
Yeah, until you get to Mr. B scale for sure. But yeah, I think so. That's the end of our questions. Roy, Zeneca, thank you so much again for joining us. I think this was definitely a great session. We'll also have, I'm sure, a lot more community members tuning into the recorded version that we'll put out. So I really appreciate your time. I'm sure everyone here already follows you, is updated with everything you're doing, but anything that we should all be keeping an eye out for over the next few weeks/months that's on your bucket list?
Yeah, I mean, two things. The PFP is coming out later this month. That's going to be exciting. And then my course on personal branding in Web3, which I think is probably a September type of launch, hopefully, if things go well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, good luck. And I mean, I'm waiting to see what the PFPs look like. I'm quite excited to change my chest into the PFP, and I'm sure, we'll share the course out as well with the community once it's out. So thank you so much again.